Joining us now from Monterey Bay, California, is Leon Panetta, who served as Secretary of Defense under President Obama. Mr. Secretary, since you had the job, knowing what you know now, what would you want to know as Secretary of Defense about what happened?
Well, I'd like to know what exactly is the strategy here. We've just deployed a very significant force to the Caribbean. 15,000 men and women in uniform are deployed there. We have a carrier strike group there. I'm not quite sure what the strategy is, whether it's aimed at regime change for Maduro or whether this is to try to stop narco trafficking from Venezuela.
Based on what you've seen here, Mr. Secretary, was that second strike, was that a war crime?
The second strike is a war crime because these individuals were injured. They were in the water. The basic rules of war that are involved here make very clear that you do not strike wounded people in the water in order to kill them. You basically then are responsible to try to make sure you do everything to try to protect their lives at that point. And that is the concern right now, whether or not this really violated the rules of war and constituted a criminal act.
Okay, former Defense Secretary Leon Panetta, thanks so much for the insight.
Good to be with you.
The Trump administration is rejecting accusations that at least one of its attacks on an alleged drug boat may amount to a war crime. The administration posted this clip back in September, or of the September strike. At issue is this: a second attack a short time later, which killed 2 survivors of the initial strike. The White House now acknowledges that second attack did happen, insisting that attack was legal. So was it? Joining us now is Alberto Gonzales, who served as the U.S. Attorney General under President George W. Bush and is a fantastic person to discuss this with. Mr. Attorney General, thank you very much for being here. The basic question for Americans at home is whether the U.S. military killed 2 effectively defenseless survivors clinging to the side of a drug boat that had already been hit. If that story stands up, is that a war crime?
Yeah, I think that what we have here, we do have a conflict of a non-international nature. But the Geneva Convention applies even to these kinds of conflicts. And the rules are clear that if you've got someone who does not pose a threat and is defenseless, that to summarily execute them without any kind of due process would be a violation of armed conflict. So, yes, I think that there is some serious questions that are I think we all need to explore. And hopefully Congress and others will get to the bottom of to see exactly what happened. But the reporting would lead me to conclude that, yes, in fact, if the facts bear out as we currently understand, that there was a violation of armed conflict.
Well, Mr. Attorney General, this is a major question of presidential power, of the U.S.'s role in the Caribbean and all over the world. And so I think there's a lot at stake in finding out exactly what happened. You want Congress to take a look. Congress is taking a look. But what other entity is the Justice Department empowered to investigate something like this?
The Justice Department, I think, as an initial matter, will defer to the military justice. But in fact, the department may get involved in investigating what happened here. But we have to remember that the President of the United States controls the Department of Justice. And so whether or not there would be any kind of investigation or a thorough investigation by the Department of Justice in this matter, I think based on past experience, people have questions about that. I think, and the other thing to remember is the Supreme Court has made it very clear that in areas of military conflict, there's a great deal of deference going to be paid to the President of the United States as to whether or not what was the threat level, use of force on international waters. Yeah. Court is going to be very deferential. And so from my perspective, I think it's going to be public opinion. It's going to be Congress who's going to have primary responsibility in getting to the bottom of what happened here. And hopefully it will result in some kind of accountability. Now, why does this matter? Putting aside the politics, the reason it matters is because how we treat people that are helpless, that are defenseless, particularly in an armed conflict, we care about it. Why? Because someday we're going to have soldiers in that situation where they're helpless, they're defenseless. We want them to be protected by rules of engagement. And so the notion that Secretary Hegseth said recently about, we don't care, we want to be unshackled by rules of engagement, I think is extremely dangerous. Rules of engagement exist in large part to protect our soldiers in the event they find themselves in a situation where they're at the mercy of an adversary.
Yeah, can we look at the bigger picture here? Because Attorney General Pam Bondi has denied claims that she is operating at the president's direction, that the Justice Department is still an independent agency. Do you see it that way?
I don't. From my perspective, it appears that it doesn't appear to be so. But again, I always remind myself as the Attorney General, former Attorney General, I don't know what I don't know. Oftentimes, actions, decisions by the Department of Justice, by the leadership of the department, are based upon information that is classified, that is privileged. And so perhaps if I had the same kind of information, the same kind of priorities, the same kind of push by the White House, that I might make a different decision. It is true, though, I think it's pretty clear, that since Watergate, there's been an ethos at the Department of Justice to operate all investigations, to conduct all investigations and prosecutions independent from the White House. I had instances when I was the Attorney General, when I personally told President Bush, do not get involved in this ongoing investigation. It was consistent with the norms following Watergate. And also, it protects the president from charges of political interference.
Mr. Attorney
and
General.
so I think that we're seeing something. I think the attitude, there's a difference today.
Mr. Attorney General, I'm sorry,
Yes.
the computer is going to take us off. Thank you very much.
We return to our top story. The Pentagon is under scrutiny over a newly revealed follow-up strike on an alleged drug boat in the Caribbean. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth today distanced himself from the second strike. He says he authorized the attack, but it was Navy Admiral Mitch Bradley who ordered it in real time. However, Hegseth says he stands by Bradley and all military personnel.
President Trump always has our back. We always have the back of our commanders who are making decisions in difficult situations, and we do in this case and all these strikes. They're making judgment calls and ensuring that they defend the American people.
Retired Army Lieutenant Colonel Geoffrey joins us now. He's the director of the Center for Military Law and Policy at Texas Tech University School of Law. He also served as the Army's senior law of war expert advisor. Thank you so much for being here. Secretary Hegseth says he authorized the attack, but he didn't personally order that second strike or see any survivors. Is he still legally responsible?
Well, if he authorized the attack on the government's theory that the United States is engaged in an armed conflict with a narco terrorist group, then the assumption is that there was a determination that the boat was a lawful military target and authorizing the attack would be appropriate. I think there are very difficult questions of whether or not it's legitimate to even claim you're in a war functionally with a criminal gang, but that's the government's position. And I think your introduction is correct. He's distancing himself from that second strike.
Secretary Hegseth today said the fog of war played a role in the strikes on September 2nd. Let's listen.
I did not personally see survivors, but I stand because the thing was on fire. It was exploded and fire and smoke. You can't see anything. You got digital. This is called the fog of war. This is what you in the press don't understand.
What's your reaction?
Look, the fog of war is a real thing, but this all started with reporting that the commander did see survivors that were shipwrecked clinging to the side of that ship, and then there was a decision to attack it again. I think there are very important questions that need to be asked of the admiral, and I share the respect for him that Secretary Hegseth indicates, but he does need to answer questions. What was the target of the second attack? Was he attacking the vessel or was he attacking the crew? And if he was attacking the vessel, why was it so urgent to attack it when he knew that there were survivors hanging on the side of the vessel as opposed to making an effort to rescue them and then finishing off the boat? But again, I think this fog of war statement had more to do with distancing himself from the decision to launch the second attack then it had to do with the admiral's decision to launch it, from what we know.
Would targeting the vessel a second time, if that was the target, would that even make sense to you then if we are to take the secretary of his word that it was on fire and smoke and the like? It's no longer a threat at that point.
Well, listen, the vessel was attacked in the first place because it was determined to be a military objective. And I have my criticism of the government's position that this is a war to begin with. But if it was a military objective and it was still floating, then yes, I could see the logic of finishing it off, if you will, and sinking it. The really difficult question to answer is a timing question. Why was it so urgent to strike it a second time at that moment? It's not as if the vessel were armed and firing at U.S. assets or that the vessel was in the process of fleeing the scene. It was dead in the water. It wasn't armed. And if we knew that there were survivors clinging to the vessel, then the important question at that point becomes, why was it so urgent to attack it again at that moment, knowing that the likely result would be the death of those shipwrecked crew members?
Interesting. All right, Geoffrey Corn, thank you so much for joining.
Thank you.
Welcome back to Face the Nation. We're joined by Virginia Democratic Senator Tim Kaine. Senator, thanks so much for being with us.
Absolutely, Nancy.
I want to start out by asking you about the situation in Venezuela, because there are now serious signs that military action, including potentially ground action, could be imminent. You have tried twice to pass war powers resolutions that would force President Trump to get approval from Congress first before any military action. Twice you have failed. Do you think the numbers on this will change if there is ground action, and will it even matter at that point?
I do believe the numbers will change. You're right. I along with others, filed a resolution, no war in Venezuela or against Venezuela without congressional approval. It failed, but that was before all of these assets have amassed around Venezuela and before President Trump said that the airspace needs to be closed. I will move with colleagues, Senator Schumer, Senator Paul, Senator Schiff, immediately should there be military action. And then secondly, I also attempted to stop what I view as illegal boat strikes in the Caribbean and the Pacific together with Adam Schiff. And the circumstances have changed in the months since we had that vote. In each of these instances, we were able to get 2 Republicans to vote together with Democrats. We think the escalating pace and some of the recent revelations, so for example, the recent revelation about the kill everyone order apparently dictated by Secretary Hegseth, we do believe that we will get more support for these motions when they are refiled.
You're referring to this new Washington Post report that says that Secretary Hegseth called for everyone aboard the first suspected drug boat that was targeted to be killed. When 2 people survived, the military went back in, reportedly with a follow-on strike. What questions do you have for the Pentagon about that situation?
Well, first, if that reporting is true, it's a clear violation of the DOD's own laws of war, as well as international laws about the way you treat people who are in that circumstance. And so this rises to the level of a war crime if it's true. And the questions that we've been asking for months are, give us the evidence that the folks on board were really narco traffickers. In one instance, there were 2 survivors, one Colombian, one Ecuadorian, in a different strike. Instead of arresting them and prosecuting them, the U.S. picked them up and returned them to their countries of origin where they were released. So if they were narco traffickers, why would we do that? We need more evidence about that. And we definitely need the administration to finally answer the question of why strike rather than interdict. If you know where the ships are, you can interdict. And when you do, you get evidence. You get individuals. You can squeeze them to give testimony against their higher ups. You get evidence with the drug seizures. And finally, the other question that my colleagues and I are deeply worried about is the entire legal rationale for these strikes. We had to pry with a crowbar after weeks and weeks out of the administration the supposed legal rationale for the strikes in international waters. It was very shoddy because it's classified. I can't tell you what's in it, but I can tell you it was not at all persuasive that these are legal actions. And so together with a whole series of things, the early retirement of the head of Southcom, the news that the Southcom's lead attorney said these strikes were not lawful, the decision of allies like the UK to stop sharing intelligence with the United States in this area because they believe the strikes are illegal. It's time for Congress to rein in a president who is deciding to wage war on his own say-so, which is not what the Constitution allows.
The Washington Post is reporting that before the strike on the very first suspected drug boat in September, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth ordered that everyone on board be killed. And then when 2 of the 11 people on board survived, a follow-on strike was ordered to finish them off in the water. Now, some law of war experts are saying that that was illegal, that killing people who are no longer able to fight is a war crime. What is your view, and what questions do you have for the Pentagon?
Congress does not have information that that had occurred. Both the chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee, chairman of the House Armed Services Committee, and ranking members have opened investigations. Obviously, if that occurred, that would be very serious, and I agree that would be an illegal act. That is not the legal opinion or the information or the legal justification, the acts that have been described to Congress that are being undertaken in this. There are very serious concerns in Congress about the attacks on the so-called drug boats down in the Caribbean and the Pacific, and the legal justification that's been provided. But this is completely outside of anything that has been discussed with Congress, and there is an ongoing investigation.
Very interesting to hear you say that this might be an illegal act. I know your committee is asking more questions. We'd love to learn what you find out. Congressman Mike Turner of Ohio, thank you so much for being with us. I appreciate it.